Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Just let me know that you can hear us and see us. We are very excited to have you with us today. Um, if you can see us and hear us, please type that on the chat. Let's wait a little bit. I know that there's a little bit of delay, so let's wait and see where people are tuning it from. And while you guys are at it, I want to make sure that everyone understand that today we have Caleb and Katie. We are going to talk about influencer marketing. What's exciting about today is that we have both sides of the equation. We have Caleb, who's an influencer, and we have Katie, who's an expert marketer on the topic. So with that, I see that people can see and hear from the chat, so that's great. So Caleb, Katie, how are you guys doing today?
We're good. We're great. We're in beautiful New York City. It's sunny. It's spring.
Yes, finally warming up. So super
Nice.
excited to get into everything. And thank you guys so much for joining from wherever you are.
Nice. I can see that we have people from Brooklyn. So yeah, let's start with this. I'll give you guys the floor. And with that, I'll share your presentation, okay?
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for being here, guys. We're super excited to dive into the presentation, a little bit about Katie and I, and kind of like a summary of how we kind of got started. Katie, if you want to give your bio a bit, and then I can jump into mine, and then we can kind of describe the course.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So my background has always been on the corporate side of the business, focusing on communications, and most recently over the last 6-7 years on influencer marketing. I've worked with some of the biggest beauty brands in the industry, including the Estee Lauder companies and L'Oreal USA. So I've had a lot of fun and a lot of great experience and opportunities to work with leading influencers.
Yeah, and I am an influencer and photographer based in New York City. I worked with various different brands, from Delta to Grey Goose to Audi to Paul Smith and Mr. Porter, over my career. And I met Katie actually about 2 years or a year and a half ago in Miami. And we kind of immediately kicked it off, and we got to talking, and it was like there was this huge disconnect between influencers and brand marketers. Or people that just had assumptions of how to get into the industry. So about 7 or 8 months ago, actually probably more at this point now, Katie, we decided to team up to create a course around influencer marketing from both sides of the industry, really giving an insight to brand marketers, people that are entrepreneurs, people that just are curious about the industry, insights from both sides of the industry. So we cover that fully in depth in our online course, and also we'll be teaching a live course coming up, and we'll get into more details on that at the end of the presentation. But for the workshop, we kind of put together a little mini crash course. We wish we could get into so many more details, obviously. But here's what we'll be covering in the workshop. We're going to be covering how to begin marketing your brand or product with influencers to increase your brand awareness, engagement rates, or increase audience size. Learn how to set your goals and KPIs in order to ensure influencer campaign success. Learn how to identify the right influencers for your campaign. Learn the secret to spotting the fakes and influencers who purchase their engagement. This one's a huge one, and we're going to kind of actually dive into that pretty in depth, which I'm excited about. And 5, learn how to successfully pitch and negotiate the best rate with your dream influencer. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. So, Katie.
So I guess if you signed up for this course, and thank you for doing that for this workshop, you're probably asking yourself, why should I be working with influencers? What do I need to know? So just so you know, a couple of statistics for you that we found fascinating. Number 1, the influencer marketing industry is anticipated to be worth $13.8 billion in 2021. And that's up from 9.7 billion over last year, which is quite staggering in terms of growth. 75% of marketers polled in this Influencer Marketing Hub survey out of 4,000 said they intend to dedicate a budget for influencer marketing in 2021. And 62% of marketers said that they are increasing their influencer marketing budgets this year, while 20% said they're keeping it the same. So that's pretty phenomenal statistics there. So it seems like there's no chance of the influencer marketing industry slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, so diving right in, the first thing we want to discuss is really campaign strategy. What does success look like for you or your team? When you're clear on your KPIs, so key performance indicators, if those of you aren't familiar with that term, when you're not clear on your KPIs and goals, you'll be able to plan a campaign with a clear objective and be able to better analyze your campaign success. What's interesting and what Katie and I found fascinating was in this study that was run by Influencer Marketing Hub, 33% of marketers still don't measure their ROI on their influencer marketing campaigns. That is crazy to us, that people just kind of throw money and just hope for the best and don't actually measure their ROI. So questions to ask yourself when developing a strategy for your campaign. And this is super, super key, because if you don't have a strategy for your campaign, you're not really going to understand what objectives and things that you're trying to achieve. So questions to ask yourself: what are your goals when working with influencers, right? Do you want to increase your brand awareness and brand visibility? Do you want to increase engagement on your platforms? Do you want to reach a new demographic? Do you want to receive beautiful content that you can use on your own social media channels? These are all really important questions to ask yourself. And a little bit more technical, Katie, if you want to kind of some of these.
So something else that we coach about is when you're developing your strategy, not only do you need your large, broad objectives like the ones Caleb just talked about, but you also need to know what are your KPIs. And a KPI is a key performance indicator. So that's basically going to tell you, like, what am I aiming for here? So here are 6 examples of great KPIs. Number 1 would be engagement. So whether you want to increase your followers or increase the engagement on your social feeds. Number 2, increase your brand reach, right? You want to know if you can increase how many people know about your brand or your product. Number 3, user-generated content. So perhaps you are a young business or you just launched a new business and you need a lot of content for all those Instagram posts, right? Well, where do you get that? A great place to start might be working with influencers to help get a library of content that you can then use later on throughout your social media journey. Maybe it's traffic, clicks, website views, etc. Maybe you want conversion or sales. I mean, who doesn't want sales, right? And maybe you want to turn around your audience sentiment. Maybe you're a more established brand and maybe you have some negative comments like running constantly on your Instagram feed or other social media platforms. So working with influencers can be a very great way to help you change audience sentiment. But be realistic when you're setting these objectives. You really need to identify which ones are the most important for you and focus on that.
Yeah, and why can't I have all of these goals for one campaign, right? Because the strategy for achieving these different results is typically different, right? You can't expect one campaign to fit all of these KPIs. And in our full online course, we actually discuss each of these KPIs in detail. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into that because we want to cover so much. But those are things to really ask yourself. What are your main KPIs and objectives in your campaign strategy phase? So campaign planning is next after you kind of develop this campaign strategy.
Yeah. So once you've clearly outlined your goals and your KPIs, then you can move to this phase. You can move to the campaign planning phase, and you're going to identify the specifics of your campaign. So generally speaking, here are a few big things that you guys should all be aware of before you start your campaign. Number 1, campaign rollout timeline. So what are your deliverable dates? Like, when do you need the content by? What are the dates that you're going to push the content? When is that content going to go live? How many influencers do you need? Is it 1? Is it 10? Is it more? That's really varying per campaign, right? How many pieces of content do you need from each influencer? What are the influencer deliverables that they need to deliver on? So is that your number of posts? How many posts? How many stories do they have to plan to create? Video production? All of those things need to be thought out well in advance. Other things to consider are you going to need to review the content before it goes live? You know, some brands are perfectly okay with, you know, just having influencers like Caleb produce the content and then push it live without them reviewing it, but a lot aren't, you know, and I've actually never worked for a brand where they were okay with it. So you need to set those dates and know when you're going to need to see their first drafts. You'll need usage rights for the product, most likely, or maybe you won't. Are you wanting influencers in a specific city with a specific demographic? That's also something to consider. Will you be requiring any exclusivity on the content? And if so, how long and in what category? So all of these things are things that you need to think of well in advance.
And kind of going back into the approvals, I think it's super important to approve influencer content. On my side, on the influencer side, I'd say out of like every 10 collaborations that I have, only 1 or 2 actually don't require approvals. And Katie, maybe you want to jump into a little bit from the brand side, why a brand might want to approve content and maybe like what can go wrong there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I can give you some examples, you know, approving content, you know, in some cases, packaging is a big issue, right? So for example, there was this one experience I had where we were doing a campaign and it was a skincare brand and we had the beautiful packaging and, you know, it was product on a bathroom sink or something along those lines or on a shelf in a bathroom. Well, there were other brand products that were our competitors sitting on the same shelf next to our product, right? And the influencer, you know, meant well. He didn't really think anything of it. He was thinking, oh, that looks more authentic. It looks more organic, right? But from a brand marketing perspective, it was a huge no-no. I think my boss almost had a heart attack when he saw the competitor's product sitting right next to ours. So in that case, we had to reshoot. So I think it's always a good idea just to, you know, review the content and just make sure that everything is cool.
Yeah, and another quick story on my side. I actually recently shot a campaign for a shoe brand which was a specifically sustainable footwear company. I drink a lot of coffee in New York, so I had a coffee cup in my post or in the photo that I sent for approval, and the coffee cup was plastic. And you know I should probably get more of a reusable cup, but that was a red flag, and I had to actually reshoot that content. So. It's always good to ask for approvals because there's little things that influencers can overlook that they might not need, like might not be meaning to, but they do. So always good to have that.
Sure.
Next is targeting and identifying the right influencers for your brand. So there's so many factors on the type of influencers that is right for your brand. We like to ask ourselves a few questions when finding the right influencer or influencers.
Absolutely. And, you know, this slide cracks me up because bigger doesn't always mean better. And one of Caleb's favorite stories that I like to tell is the time that I was working on one influencer campaign, but with 2 very different influencers. One was Kylie Jenner, who you see here on the screen, has 226 million followers. And the other one was Chriselle Lim, who at the time, she actually only had about 800,000 as opposed to 1.3, which is what she has now. So obviously big difference in scale, right? And of course, you know, the myth is that, you know, well, because Kylie Jenner has so many followers, your campaign working with her is going to be so much more successful than working with somebody on a smaller scale. And in the case of the Kylie Chriselle, we actually saw better conversion rates on all of the content that Chriselle posted about. So think of all the swipe ups that she did, driving to the brand's website. We saw better conversion and more traffic being driven to our website with Chriselle by far. It was a landslide. You know, so it was quite impressive to see the results of that. And for a fraction of the price, right? She cost a lot less to work with than Kylie did, as you can imagine. And in addition to that, not only did she perform better and she sold more products, but at the same time, you know, we had a little bit of negative feedback from our consumers based on the Kylie campaign. And a lot of them thought it was not organic, it wasn't authentic. You know, oh, we don't really believe that she uses this product. Like, oh, please, you really think she's going to use this product with all the money she has? So it kind of had like a negative impact in a way, whereas with the Chriselle content, it was extremely well received. So just something to keep in mind when you're beginning to vet influencers and start looking. It's not always about the reach.
Yeah, and some other things to to kind of go into when you are trying to identify the right influencer for your brands, these are some important questions to ask. So like, does this person align with my brand's values and what we stand for? Does this influencer post about similar products, and is their audience interested? You know, if your influencer is posting tons of stuff about fashion, and you are a food brand, you know, you probably don't want to work with that influencer unless you probably want to target someone different, right? Has the influencer worked with any direct competitors, and how long ago? This is an easy thing to just kind of go through their feed and look at the brands that they've supported and kind of see, oh, have they worked with a competitor of mine? If it was more than 3 months ago, you know, you're probably in the clear. But if it was last week, you know, reaching out to them might not be the most appropriate thing. If they've been working with another brand that is your competitor. If your main objective is user-generated content, does this influencer produce content that is aligned with my brand's aesthetic? This is an important one. Who are they reaching? What cities are they in? What are their ages? You know, if you are marketing an alcohol brand and someone that you're working with is 22, you know, they're above the drinking age, but are their followers, you know, the younger demographic, like 18, 17, 16? These are really important questions to ask. When they ask a question, do their followers respond and answer? Are their followers asking them questions on products they're wearing? These are all great ways to tell if an influencer has an engaged audience, right? If someone's asking a question about what they're wearing, does the influencer respond? Take a look at their comments before working with an influencer. Like, go through their feed and take a look at what their audience is asking. And if the influencer is responding, because that means that they are engaged in their community, and that's important. Another one is the influencer purchasing engagement and followers? We're kind of going to get into spotting the fakes, which is one of my favorite topics, because a lot of brands today, yes, in 2021, still think it's 2020, are still working with influencers that have bought their followers and consistently buy likes, views, and engagement. This isn't just limited to small brands that have just started with influencer marketing. We're talking about huge global brands. Which ones? Well, if we told you brands including H&M, Gillette, Red Bull, DKNY, just to name a few, these are brands that I've seen work with influencers that have bought engagement and buy their likes and followers. And a lot of software programs out there right now actually still have hard times detecting if people are buying likes and engagement. It's easy to tell now who's bought followers, but buying likes is a lot more difficult. So I'll kind of go over to some of my strategies when I consult with brands around influencer marketing, what I like to look for to determine if someone is authentic and purchasing engagement, or is authentic or purchasing engagement, right? So how can you avoid this? That's a great question. Let's get into some of the tips. So what I like to do is step one, click on an influencer's post and click on their likes. Do a little scroll. Step two, see who's liking their posts. Scroll down a bit. What are the accounts you're seeing? Are they random accounts like Jubilee 45_657, Trust Management 568, basically profiles with lots of underscores, lots of numbers, just things that look kind of sketchy. Profiles that might not have any photos. These are all red flags, right? Step three, I click into some of these accounts. Some will be following more than 3,000, 4,000 accounts. Some will be following 0. Some will have no photos uploaded, and some won't even have a bio. If you see a majority of their likes falling into this category, chances are the influencer is purchasing likes and engagement. Just because sometimes you might see some of these accounts doesn't mean all of it has been purchased, or maybe it doesn't even mean that all of it has been purchased, but it is a red flag, and it should you should kind of dig deeper on that person. This also takes a matter of like 2 minutes for each account, so it's so worth doing before you decide you want to work with an influencer and pay them. So let's look at a real life example. I've obviously blurred their account for privacy reasons and kind of names associated. But this is an account. They have 182,000 followers. They're following 1,700 people. Their account looks fine. great photos. You know, their engagement rate looks great. He's getting 4,576 likes on a post, which is pretty average for someone that has about 180,000 followers and 72 comments. This was actually a partnership, which I find unfortunate because the brand really didn't get what they paid for. If you look at screenshot 3, this is a little video of me going through some of their likes. Just kind of take a look at these likes and let me know if you think these are fake, right? And it goes kind of fast, but we'll take like a little pause. Look at this account. This is not a real person. These are not real people. And there's a ton of them. So to me, this is a huge red flag. And we'll take a little closer look at the people that were liking this photo. These are some of the accounts that I kind of just screenshotted and grabbed while putting together this example. That's not to mean every single like he's getting is fake, but I would definitely avoid working with this specific individual if I saw this. So what to look for, and you guys might want to screenshot this this post because this has helped me a lot. Basically, an account that has no profile images. An account handle that has 2 to 3 numbers in it is definitely usually a red flag. An account handle that has various underscores. We're not talking about 1 or 2. We're talking about like 4 or 5 or 6, and I've seen that a lot. Click into the profile. Does the account follow more than 3,000-4,000 people? Sometimes I've seen 5,000 or 6,000. Click into the profile again. Does the account have a bio or no bio? Does an account post like no photos? Maybe the account has photos, but the last photo was posted years ago, like in 2016 or 2017. You know, any combo of the above is a clear sign that of fake accounts and fake likes. So that kind of goes into that's kind of the ending of the spotting the fakes, but this is something that's helped me a lot when I consult with different brands. And I know, Katie, you were pretty fascinated when I kind of showed you all of this, and now you kind of go into your own accounts and follow and see who's purchasing engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, to be giving your money and spending your marketing dollars on working with an influencer, you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth, right? I mean, and especially you want to make sure that all your hard work on the campaign and with the relationship is actually meaningful. So just do your homework, do a little research. This takes literally 2 minutes, and it will help you save some money and find the right influencer to work with.
Yeah.
So let's say now you found the influencer and it's not one that's buying engagement. It's not one that's buying likes and followings and stuff like that. Let's talk about influencer outreach. So
Katie,
yes.
Can we grab a question before we jump into that?
Yeah.
Karen is asking, how do you find influencers?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And there's a lot to that question. And we cover a lot in our course with outreach strategies. But one of my favorite ways to find influencers, and I'm sure, Katie, you can expound on this a bit more, is to go find an influencer or find someone that you like. Maybe you follow 1 or 2 influencers that resonate with you and your brand. When you go to their profile, there's something called the suggested for you button. It's basically, it's an arrow. And if you click that, it will show you similar accounts to that account. I use this tool all the time for consulting projects when sourcing influencers. When I find one that I really like and that resonates with me and their content style, I'll go to the suggested for you button and kind of go through that list and find more influencers that way. I also ask friends and ask family members who they follow and who they like, what influencers that they like. There are paid tools out there for you to find influencers in your following count range. But those are kind of like, those are paid software programs, and a lot of them actually cost quite a significant amount of money. So I always say use the suggested for you tool because it is super helpful.
Yeah, and you can also like go on other like certain brands pages as well and see who they're following, or look at maybe some of the tags and some of the influencers feeds that you're actually following. They always like kind of share friends' content and stuff like that. So you kind of go down the rabbit hole of finding other great influencers. But yeah, it's definitely like a fun search tool, right?
Yeah.
The suggested for you is a big help.
Yeah.
Like Caleb, you can show her where that is on the campaign planning slide, spotting the fakes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Let me see. So I don't know if you can see my arrow, but right next to the email button, this is what you'd click, and this would show that your suggested for you followers. So this would show accounts that are in the same location, accounts that have similar content type, and there usually is probably 30 or 40 accounts listed. So it does get pretty detailed. So definitely a hack that I love to use.
Okay, great.
To cover that too, I mean, like we go into a ton of detail on kind of influencer identification and how to find those influencers in the course. Because of time, we want to jump into some other of our content here. But yeah, Katie, if you want to take it away. Hopefully that answers your question though.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about influencer outreach and some tips on when you contact them for the first time, right? So short and sweet is always best. It is a very big best practice of Caleb and I's that you don't direct message your influencers unless you don't have their email address. You know, a lot of the influencers that we have worked with always say we never check our DMs or things get lost in the DM box because there's just so much, you know, they're just receiving so many messages in that space. It's always better to email. Another one is never blind copy, no BCC. It's the biggest and number one assured way to not get read and to not get a response. Make it personal, you know, do your research on the influencer, you know, maybe look for life milestones that, you know, that they've celebrated recently or any current events in their life that might be relevant to bring up when you first reach out, you know, like for example, when Caleb was in El Salvador, it was like, hey, I see that you were in El Salvador for a month. Looks really cool. How can we, you know, we just wanted to get to know you and introduce our brand to you. Those are all good ways to kind of capture their attention when you first email.
Yeah. And when we say life milestones too, we're also talking about like, has the influencer had a baby? Are they pregnant? Are they engaged? And are they planning a wedding? Like if your brand can fit into one of these life milestones, it makes the content a lot more authentic and organic. And it's a great way to organically partner with an influencer. So let's say you're a stroller brand and the influencer is having a baby, like you can reach out to them and say, congrats, like we'd love to gift you a stroller in exchange for some social content if you love it. So these are kind of life milestones. I know that term could be kind of confusing. Yeah.
And I think keeping it personal, you know, keep in mind, I mean, you're emailing a human being, you know, it's not just like a marketing tool, you know, so there is a real person. And of course, if you express interest in their real life, you know, I think your chances will be stronger for getting a response.
And it also kind of guilt trips the influencer to respond to you, even if they might not be interested, because you've done your research, you're sending this beautiful email, and you know, whenever I get an email that's personalized, I always respond, and usually end up working with that brand. So definitely make it personal.
Another tip is be sure not to include numbers in your first outreach. You know, you don't want to like start the conversation out with like, we want to work with you, like, you know, let's talk budget. You don't want to do that right away. You first want to make contact and introduce yourself and give them a little bit of information on your brand, maybe on the project. But really, you're just gauging interest at this point. You know, just because you reach out to an influencer doesn't mean that necessarily they're going to necessarily want to work with you, right? So really, you're just at the beginning of the relationship stage and just really trying to make sure that there's mutual interest.
And there's two different types of ways to email too. There's generally the soft pitch and the hard pitch, and we go over this a lot more in detail in our course. And we also have downloadable email templates for you to kind of use starting off, so you can kind of download those email templates and get started reaching out to influencers with an email that we've used multiple times in the past and have seen results with.
Yeah, so like the soft pitch is kind of what I was just describing about gauging interest. So an introductory email, first point of contact. And the hard pitch is more of like a sales pitch. It's like, okay, maybe you've already established a relationship with this influencer, or you at least have put your brand in front of them, but you want to work with them, and you kind of know what you want to get out of the relationship and how it should look. That's more of like a much more detailed tactic as opposed to the soft pitch. But we get into it in the course for sure. Okay.
So following up is super, super important. It's an incredibly important aspect of the pitching process. Influencers receive so many requests every week, and it's easy for your email to get lost, even if it's an amazing offer. It's so funny because I feel like I'm very good at checking my email, but things still get lost. And there's been times where the brand has followed up 2 or 3 times, and I finally see it, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But if you don't get a response from your first email, don't feel bad, right? Don't follow up. And I would say follow up probably 3 times if needed. The last time you could just kind of be like, hey, checking in one last time to see if you're interested. We'd love to work with you. And number 4, don't take it personally if someone doesn't get back to you, right? Also, don't write them off completely for future opportunities. So just because maybe this campaign didn't fit and maybe they didn't get back to you, maybe there's something you're working on in a few months that you think it would be even better of a fit. So definitely don't write them off for future opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Just because they maybe didn't get back to you right away, who knows what was going on in their lives at the moment, right? They might have been juggling like 10 projects and traveling and, or having a child or moving, you just kind of don't really know. So I think it's important to not take it personal, and if it's the right person for you, then when the time is right, you'll find an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about negotiating. When you're working with an influencer, let's say you've already reached out, there's mutual interest in working together. There's always going to be some sort of negotiation once you get to that stage, right? This can be a very time-consuming process, so you're going to want to make sure that you have enough time planned for this. So number 1, always approach your negotiations knowing what you're willing to be flexible on or not. If there's like any must-haves in your campaign, like I must have video content or I must have in-feed content, know what you can maybe give up or do without or not before you go into it, because a lot of times things will shift. So if you're not willing to budge on something, make sure you're very clear with the influencer about that, because in the end, it's going to save you a lot of time. And just because somebody is out of your price range doesn't mean that you can't work with them. And this is one of the biggest tips I can give you. Get creative. If let's say you go to an influencer and you say, I want 3 in-feed posts and I want 6 Instagram stories and I want those stories to have swipe ups. And the influencer says, okay, that's going to be $25,000. No, I'm kidding. But it's going to be a lot of money, Just because they say that, don't get discouraged, don't give up. Maybe say to them, okay, well, if I can't afford, my budget is a little bit smaller than what you're offering, and maybe instead of 6 in-feed posts, maybe I can settle for 3 with the swipe up stories, the 6 swipe up frames instead. So, just get creative, and stories are so beneficial too. So if you're working on a small budget, stories are wonderful because you can actually just drive people to your website, and you're getting direct traffic from that. So get creative and don't get discouraged. Influencers are also very flexible. Caleb can chime in on this one too. If it's a brand that they love and if it's a product that they genuinely see themselves using and it's organic, in nature, and it would relate well on their feed, and they think their audience is going to love it, they're going to try to find a way to work with you.
Yeah, and this goes back to kind of the point that we discussed previously, is doing your research. Influencers are flexible on their rates. I know for me personally, I have my set in stone rate, or I have my rates that seem to be set in stone. But if a brand approaches me and I really resonate with that brand, and it's going to be something that I can shoot fairly quickly, and something that I think my audience would really like, I'm definitely flexible with my rates. So just because, like we said, they might be out of your range or their price is crazy, kind of just say what you're willing to do. Be like, okay, our max budget is $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever your budget is, right? And if they say, you know, that's not going to work, then move on. But a lot of times you'll be able to work with them in some type of way. A quick story that I have to an influencer that I worked with on a consulting basis. The brand really wanted to work with them, and they said that this person was a fan of the brand. I think she had about 600,000 followers, which, you know, if you have 600,000 followers, you're charging quite a significant amount for a partnership. And we approached her, and her agent gave us her rates, which obviously we couldn't afford. But, you know, we basically said, here's what we're willing to offer. Let us know what she's able to do. And in the end, we got about 4 story frames from her with a swipe up for something that, you know, I would have never thought she would have done because of her level and kind of celebrity status. So all that to say, you know, negotiate, know what you're willing to be flexible on or not. And, you know, you might land your dream influencer or dream partnership that you didn't think that you could afford.
Awesome. I know that you just mentioned an agent, and I wanted to bring this question now because I think it's very related to what you were talking about. And basically, if you have any tips on how to deal with agents and yeah, basically that, like, what is the difference dealing with an agent, dealing with the influencer themselves? So what do you recommend in case of an agent?
You know, so, and Katie, you can kind of jump into this too. For influencers now, like, it's now something that's here to stay. They're now digital talent. You know, it's a huge part of everyone's marketing budget. So influencers have agents now, and this isn't just like people that have hundreds of thousands of followers. These are also micro influencers. I actually have about 45,000 followers, 45,000 followers, sorry. And I'm managed by an agency, just because there's so much inbound that you get that it actually helps to have someone that can respond to your emails and also bring you deals. So when you are dealing with an agent, a lot of times, like, they are just the voice of the influencer. The agent is talking every day with the influencer. So it's not like you're just talking to like a blank wall. And, you know, like, some agents, I guess, can be gatekeepers, but a lot of times there is a conversation happening. I know when someone approaches me with a very low rate, my agent doesn't write it off. They basically talk to me. They say, hey, this brand wants to work with you. It's below your rate. Let me know your thoughts. Sometimes they might encourage me to pass, or sometimes they might encourage me to go for it for various reasons. But just because someone has an agent or an agency doesn't mean that it's going to be harder to work with them. It actually might be easier and more streamlined, because a lot of influencers aren't actually like business people. They're creative. So
yeah, and I think too, you know, I've worked with so many agents in my career, and I think, kind of like I was saying earlier about influencers, you know, the relationship is very important. And so obviously you need to kind of treat some of those agents depending on who the influencer is. But if they're pretty high profile, like, you want to make sure that you're getting off on the right foot with them, you know, that you have a good relationship with them. You know, you could be like, Sarah, like, you know, we don't have the money for that. Come on. You know, sometimes you can, like, you know, sweet talk them a little bit, or like, if we do this, maybe we can do a second campaign later. You know, we really just want to test this, and we really have high hopes for this campaign. Is going to really take off and move the needle for our brands, you know, so we definitely imagine doing more campaigns later. Like, a lot of times I think that's kind of a good hook too, Caleb. Let me know if you agree, but like, if you kind of feel the carrot of there's more money behind in the back, I don't have a lot now, but we want to test and learn, you know, we want to test and learn how this is going to work for our brand or not. And if it's successful, you know, then we can possibly do a bunch more work together. So kind of dangle the carrot a little bit.
100%. And by dangling the carrot, in your words, Katie, too, that's not to say you should approach an influencer saying like, we'd love to do a test run. Will you do this for us for free? because that's a big way to get shut down. So just because you might want to have a test run doesn't mean that test run's going to be free, because any influencer that I know and all my friends that are kind of in the influencer space would basically write you off for saying that, because a lot of brands use it in a way that isn't genuine. They say, we'd love to possibly work together in a paid capacity in the future. And then you kind of take it when you were first starting out, and then you never hear from them again. So you're like, okay, they just wanted that free post, and now they can kind of like disregard me. So it's a bad way to or it's a good way to burn some bridges.
Yeah, and we get into this a lot in the course about the relationships, but people talk, and you also don't want your brand to get a bad reputation amongst agents and influencers. You really don't want to get off on the wrong foot, and you don't want people saying, oh, that's that company that like always tries to get stuff for free, or doesn't have budget. So kind of keep that in mind, and be good to the agents, and they're just trying to help and do their job. So
yeah. I know that is kind of the end of our presentation. We are actually teaching a live class that goes over our full curriculum over 3 weeks. It runs, it's starting May 6th, actually, and it consists of 3 of our modules, so 9 chapters, based on everything that we just kind of discussed here, going into a lot more detail, plus reporting, how to generate reports, your creative brief, all of that. But I guess before we discuss a bit more of this, we can jump into a Q&A. I'm excited to hear you guys' questions. I'm sure Katie is too. And yeah.
Sure, I'll bring this question. I think the question is basically, how usually are influencers pricing their post or their work, and what maybe like formulas they use to get to a price?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we jump into kind of pricing in the course a little bit more in detail, but I always say influencers pricing are all over the place, and there's not really standard price for influencers. I know that's probably not what you want to hear. The reason being, influencers are not only influencers, they're creatives, they're photographers, they're creative directors. So when they're quoting you, they're actually quoting you for their work outside of maybe just their reach or impressions. But typically, and this could be somewhat controversial, but typically in a big city like New York or LA, working with an influencer that has anywhere between 30 and 50,000, you're going to be looking at anywhere from $800 to up to $3,000 for the post, depending on engagement rates and depending on kind of like their quality of work. If they are a photographer, if they are someone that has a more curated feed, but the rates are definitely all over the place, and it's kind of up to you to figure out what your main objectives and KPIs are, and then see if it's worth working with that influencer. I don't know if you want to expound on that a bit.
And I can add a little bit there too. It's like sometimes, when you're working with a big, large company, it's kind of interesting because, all the brands people know each other, I might know the people over at the Tom Ford beauty brand or at MAC or whatever. Oh, I worked with that person. Oh, you did, so you kind of compare, well, what did they charge you? So it's kind of interesting to see how diverse the rates can be. And again, it kind of comes down to your negotiation and of course your relationship with that person and whatnot. But I think it's actually to our advantage that they're a little bit flexible, right? That they're not standardized.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and there's not. Some platforms will say here's our standardized pricing, but at the end of the day, it's a hard thing to standardize. So pricing is all over the place.
Yeah, and some people try to use a formula, Caleb, which is kind of interesting too. But for me, I've never worked in that way. But great question.
I really like this one. How can brands develop a successful always-on strategy with influencers?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question, Kofi. I used to work in that way as well. I think it's really makes a lot of sense. And I found one of the most successful ways to do that is to have, a really tight, consistent group and network of influencers. Sorry, New York City traffic. But to have a tight network of influencers that you are engaged with as a brand and keeping them really top of mind and making sure that you're staying in contact with them, whether that be like monthly or quarterly mailings or gifting, whether that be little mini local events, whether whether it's paid also. I think for me, I would keep certain influencers, like key influencers, I would keep them on payroll. I would basically keep them on retainer for 6 months or a year. And that way, when it was like, I get one post from him this day, one post from her that day, so that way you have like a constant, always on, as they say, easy flow of content, that your brand is being tagged and talked about in. So I really like the always on, strategy. I think it's really great, and especially for brand awareness and increased visibility. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of brands. It can be expensive though,
It depends on your strategy too. Like if you are doing a campaign, it doesn't necessarily, the go live dates for your posts don't necessarily need to be the same day. You can stagger the content over 1 or 2 months. So let's say you're working with 4 influencers and you want the campaign to last 2 or 3 months. You can stagger that content so you're kind of like always on.
And actually, you probably should, because I know at least when I see 70 different influencers all talking about the same dress on the same day, it's like it's not a secret that happened.
Yeah.
It's clearly that was all planned. So it's kind of nice when you see it roll out over the course of like a month or 2.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think that was great. I have another one, and I'll add a little bit more flavor to that. Mm-hmm. Ruth is basically asking how many influencers to work with. I definitely understand that depends on like what is your goal and what is your budget. So why don't we give Ruth like 3 different scenarios for that? Like, let's say we have a small business that have a small budget of $500, and then we have a medium-sized business that has a $3,000 budget. Like, what would you recommend to either of those business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can cover if you have $500 to spend on an influencer, so what was the question? In case you haven't covered it, let me ask how to figure out how many influencers to work with. So let's say like I said, it really goes back to all your goals. But let's say you have $500 and you want to test out the waters for an influencer. I would personally target more micro influencers, so people in the 20 to 30,000 follower range. And really craft a pitch that is engaging, and really select those influencers that are going to love your brand, and don't just send a mass email hoping that you catch a few. Really target the ones that you want to work with and create a pitch that really entices them, and leverage stories. So let's say you have $500, maybe you just do 2 influencers in that price range with just stories and a swipe up going to your website. Like, that's a great introductory way to kind of like get working with them. Katie, I don't know if you want to cover like a larger budget, but.
Yeah, I mean, the same way. I mean, obviously a larger budget is going to open more doors for you. So I think you did a great job answering the $500 one, because that's very challenging at times. But having a larger budget just means you can probably get more out of it, right? So maybe you target somebody that has a slightly higher reach. Maybe they're, a macro influencer with like above 60,000, followers that will kind of, increase your brand awareness a little bit more. Or you could also stick with the micro influencers, which are my favorite category, because I feel like their engagement rates are so much higher. And maybe just get more content out of it, So, I mean, at the end of the day, your influencer is spreading the word about your great product or your brand or your service, but they're also developing content for you. I mean, as long as you choose wisely, hopefully they're creating beautiful content that you can then turn around and use on your social media feeds, or you can use it in your paid digital media strategy. So if you're going to be doing digital ads, on Facebook or Instagram, you can use that content accordingly. So I think for me, if I had more money, I would just ask for additional content.
Yeah. And I think going back to what Katie said, bigger doesn't always mean better. So if you do have a larger budget, rather than just going with one large influencer that might have like 500,000 followers or 200 or 300,000 followers, going with five or six or seven smaller influencers that have 50,000 followers is actually going to probably, depending on your goals, which, like we said, we discuss a lot more in the course, whatever your goals are, it will probably hit your main KPIs a lot better than having that one influencer that just has 500,000 followers. So
right, absolutely.
I will ask one myself, and this is for both of you. What has been the most successful influencer campaign that you have both have experience with?
Yeah.
Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. The one I like to reference a lot was a campaign that was completely 360 in every way. And I loved working on it because not only, it wasn't just engage with an influencer, have them create content and post, right? It was, well, I can tell you the name. It was an influencer named Pietro Boselli. And if you ladies and gentlemen haven't heard of him, you should look him up. He is kind of like called the world's hottest math teacher. Basically, he's a professor in London, and he's also a fashion model. Coincidentally, he's got one of the most beautiful bodies ever. Big fitness person. And we invited him to work with us. And actually, we didn't have a big budget for this at all, and he was very eager to work with us. And so what we did is our strategy was really unique in that he wasn't necessarily a content creator. So we did a campaign photo shoot with him, hosted by the brand that we then used in ads. So that was one touch point. But what was so interesting about what we also did is when he would post about us, we actually asked him to host an event for us at one of our retail stores, which was actually Bloomingdale's 59th Street. And we were selling men's skincare, which is very tricky sell, especially in this country where men are, maybe just going to CVS or the drugstore to buy, their face creams or lotions. And we were selling a very expensive cream. And so what we had him do is we had him announce the partnership on his feed. And we also had him do swipe up links to RSVP for the event at Bloomingdale's 59th Street. And he was flying from London to New York for the event. So there was like a long gap where there was a lot of hype, with his followers, and we could see it happening in real time, and we could see all the comments from his feed posts and all this stuff. And by the time the day of the event happened and came, we had over 300 guests waiting at the door, waiting to meet with this person. And we sold over $10,000 worth of products within 2 hours, which was the biggest men's event that Bloomingdale's had ever had. And they said we actually outperformed Polo Ralph Lauren, which,
Wow.
To anybody in the world of beauty and skincare and fashion, they're like number one. And so to have outsold Nacho, the famous polo player, was pretty impressive. So I will say that was my favorite influencer campaign because, it was content, but it was also event driven and sales driven. And we really tested that, and we really kind of broke the mold in terms of conversion. So it was great.
Yeah, I think on my end, and I'll go quickly, so because I know we see more of a few more questions coming in. On the influencer side, I did a campaign a year and a half, 2 years ago with a gin brand called Monkey 47. It was a multi-month activation. So basically there were multiple posts and multiple story frames. And we kind of go into a lot of detail on why repetition is key and why you should actually be leveraging influencers with multiple posts, whether that's maybe one post and a few stories, because their consumer and their follower remembers so much better when they're posting about it multiple times. So this campaign was 4 months long, and it was basically once a month I would go to a key account that this gin was served at and basically highlight a cocktail, highlight the space, and highlight where you can get the gin from. And it was super successful as far as people would go to those places and kind of ask for this gin. And people kind of knew that I was genuinely a fan of the gin. So it just came off super, super organic. So I think that was probably one of my most successful influencer marketing projects from the influencer side.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing. I think that was amazing to hear. I got a last one. Do you have some tips, strategies specific to selling an online course with influencers? I imagine it's different from selling physical products. So what do you guys think about this one?
Interesting question. I think it depends on the course that you're selling, for sure. But I would say if the influencer posts about the topic of your course organically, let's say they're a food blogger and your course is about food, I think it's worth having that conversation with the influencer and seeing if they're open to working with you in a capacity of promoting their course via their social media platforms. It's something that I don't necessarily get pitched for all the time by any means. It would definitely be unique. So I think there could be some interesting ways that you could partner with influencers, like obviously depending on what your course is about. But I think it really comes down to identifying the right influencer and kind of testing the waters in a sense, right, Katie? I mean, that's a unique question.
Yeah, I think they might want to have some sort of deeper connection with the product that you're offering, which is the online course. I would think, because I guess it could get tricky, but I think, like you said, like if you're contacting, an influencer known for their food content, like in you're doing something related to food, there might be a fit there or an overlap. Or the other thing I could think of is, offer them some sort of affiliate, link, where for every click to your website, or to the site, maybe they get a percentage of your sales.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if I can add my 2 cents to that question, I think it's very important that the audience of the influencer has an overlap with the audience that you're trying to reach. So if you can find an influencer with that overlap, then you will probably see some good results for your course.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So I think that's it for questions. I want to thank you both. Wait, we have one last one.
Yeah.
Let's grab it. How would you measure the capacity of a local or regional influencer instead of a national one?
That's a good question. Immediately off the top of my head, I'm thinking, if you have once this whole COVID situation is over, if you have an in-person event, let's say in New York, you're going to want to target someone whose followers are in New York, but is also located in New York, or that could be anywhere. Let's say North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina. You can target someone that is in Raleigh, North Carolina, who most of their followers are in Raleigh, North Carolina, and kind of target someone on a local scale rather than a national. If you are, that's just off the top of my head though, but Katie, you can add your 2 cents there.
It was interesting. We had a student in our last live course that had a similar question, because she was working in Maine, where they really only wanted like homegrown influencers, very proud of their state. So I think for local versus regional, again, it would depend on what the product is, and it would depend on if you need like in-person, face-to-face activity with this influencer. But, local always makes sense if you're trying to sell like in that area. In the case with Pietro Boselli, where we had him flown over from London, and he was, much more of an international, I guess, kind of figure, it worked out even better for us, because I think people just wanted to meet that person. So I think it also depends on like how big is the influencer, right? But that's a good question. Definitely kind of a tricky one.
Yeah.
Awesome. So with that, I want to thank you both for your time. This was a free workshop, and I'll share again the link to join your paid course. I want to also ask the audience to give thanks to Caleb and Katie. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for spending your Friday afternoon with us. Hopefully you have a great weekend.
Yep.
And we're excited for our next live course. So that all that information has been dropped in. So hopefully you guys will join us. We really go into a lot more detail. So excited.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.